We are starting the straighten up and fly right maneuver, where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance masses in preparation for parachute deploy and to roll over to give the radar a better look at the ground.
Heat shield set.
Perseverance is now slowed to subsonic speeds and the heat shield has been separated. This allows both the radar and the cameras to get their first look at the surface. Current velocity is 145 meters per second at an altitude of about 9.5 kilometers above the surface.
On February 18th, 2021, NASA's Perseverance rover descended onto Mars. Footage of this event was broadcasted to the entire world, and millions of people tuned in to witness an incredible achievement of mankind.
Applicate indicate chute deploy.
The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration in the velocity. Our current velocity is 403 meters per second. Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the signs of past life.
But there was something else that happened during the descent that caught the attention of some viewers. The parachute. When the parachute deployed, many people noticed its unique pattern. The intention behind its design was so that NASA could visibly see the orientation of the parachute during the descent portion of the mission. While that explanation makes sense, people dug into this deeper and found that you can break the parachute into 4 distinct sections. Although we're only going to focus on 3 of these sections. They figured out that if you assign each color of the ring a number, red being 1 and white being 0, you could use a 10-bit binary code to decode a message. The inner ring gives us the letters D, A, R, E. Continuing this process on the other rings gives us more letters, and eventually a phrase appears. The Perseverance parachute is an incredible look into the mindset that has led humanity to the surface of Mars. But how did we get here? What led us from studying the heavens above to actually visiting them today? Early Chinese history showed humans using gunpowder tubes in a contraption called a fire arrow. This practice, as it turns out, is rocketry in its earliest form. Da Vinci created many sketches of flying contraptions. Some of his sketches resemble birds, while others would resemble a modern-day helicopter. In the 1780s, the Montgolfier brothers demonstrated that humans could rise into the sky using hot air balloons. But balloons could not be steered or controlled, and they often drifted with the wind. Sir George Cayley identified the 4 fundamental forces acting on an aircraft. Cayley had designed many gliders in his time, and his experiments with them laid the foundation for every flying contraption that followed. Another prominent figure in aviation was Otto Lilienthal. He spent his days building and perfecting many different types of gliders. His book, Bird Flight as the Basis for Aviation, published in 1889, is still to this day considered one of the most important works in aviation. One of Otto's biggest contributions was learning that curved wings generated more lift than flat wings. But one day in 1896, Otto took flight in one of his gliders and crashed. He passed away one day later, his last words being, "Sacrifices must be made." A lot of his work went on to inspire the Wright brothers. Wilbur and Orville Wright were bicycle manufacturers. Bicycles had become all the rage in the 1880s, and the two brothers decided to capitalize on this craze, while also running a local paper. While they managed to run a successful company selling bikes to the citizens of Ohio, they had their sights set on a very different form of transportation. The Wright brothers had begun taking trips to Kitty Hawk. Here they tested various types of kites and large unmanned gliders. During their tests, the brothers identified and solved an entirely new concept for their time: 3-axis control. Pitch controlled whether the aircraft pointed up or down, yaw turned the nose left and right, and roll tilted the wings from side to side. Together, these three movements gave the pilot control over the aircraft while flying. The Wright Flyer featured many moving parts that allowed the pilot to achieve 3-axis control. After many designs, Wilbur and Orville arrived in Kitty Hawk on December 17, 1903, and for the first time in history, humans flew. Once the world had found out about the Wright brothers' achievements, every other engineer and thrill seeker began building their own contraptions.
Well, a windmill will raise water, so why shouldn't it raise an airplane? Perhaps that's what Mr. Jonathan Caldwell thought when he designed and built this contraption, which is being shown to the public for the first time.
And so many others joined in and contributed to aviation.
The wheels turn all right, but it just won't leave the ground.
Each of them attempting to improve upon the design flown in Kitty Hawk. And every year since then, each aircraft was flying faster and farther. Everyone was testing out their own designs and wing shapes. The whole world was obsessed with this new technology.
A single circular wing allows a quick takeoff, and it can go 135 miles an hour.
Aircraft that could only withstand flight for seconds were now in flight for hours. The English Channel was crossed via flight for the first time ever in 1909, and the world became a bit smaller. As aviation began to connect borders in new ways, the governments of the world began to see its other uses. In 1909, the first military craft was purchased for $30,000 by the U.S. military. While aviation promised to provide a new way to explore, it also gave new advantages on the battlefield. When World War I broke out in 1914, flight was still in its infancy. Most military leaders considered them nothing more than flying observers. Back in 1911, French General Ferdinand Foch said, "Airplanes are interesting toys, but of no military value." And so reconnaissance was the first mission the airplane was deemed useful for. Pilots would simply look down and report what they saw. This new advantage made the militaries of the world adopt the airplane into their plans. And stopping a plane from completing its mission became a priority. As the war raged on, innovation in flight had become accelerated. Engines were much better, which in turn made planes fly faster. And eventually, engineers figured out how to mount machine guns on the front of airplanes. Because of this new breakthrough, a new kind of hero emerged from the skies of Europe: the fighter ace. In a letter Orville Wright wrote in 1917, he said, "When my brother and I built and flew the first man-carrying flying machine, we thought we were introducing into the world an invention which would make further wars practically impossible. After the war, the many pilots of the world found themselves out of a job. And so they all took to the skies in a whole new way. In what many consider the golden age of flight. Instead of fighting for dominance in the sky, many pilots flew from town to town performing aerial stunts for large crowds. They were known as barnstormers.
The one who most often captured the public's eye was the war-trained flyer who took up barnstorming.
Airmail routes began connecting cities across continents. Information that would take weeks to reach its destination could now be relayed in a few hours. Engineers continued refining the airplane, and as airframes and engines became more reliable, more achievements were being made. The first transatlantic flight was completed in 1919. By this point, engineers and pilots had made so much progress that competition became part of the culture of aviation. Many pilots were trying to break records and complete challenges, and aviation's long list of celebrities started to grow. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic Ocean alone in a custom-built plane named the Spirit of St. Louis. He left New York, and 33 hours later, he landed in Paris, France. Another prominent figure from this time was, of course, Amelia Earhart, who became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. For a long time, flying was a luxury. You either had to be a pilot to fly or very wealthy. And in the mid-1930s, a new model of plane was developed, the Douglas DC-3. This plane helped make commercial air travel accessible to everyone, and for the first time, ordinary people were allowed in on the fantasy of flying. The golden age of aviation had shown what flight could accomplish in times of peace, and the world had fallen in love with flying. Yet again, nations prepared for war, and the airplane would be called upon to serve. By the time World War II started, the airplane became one of the most important technologies in the world. By this point, there were over 700 different types of airplanes that all served different functions.
These are lethal weapons. Their one purpose, the sole reason for their existence, to knock enemy planes out of the sky.
Aside from aerial combat that required smaller fighters, engineers developed large bombers capable of carrying thousands of pounds of bombs and traveling thousands of miles. While engineers worked to improve the airplane, others continued pursuing a radically different approach to flight. In Germany, a team of engineers led by Wernher von Braun was developing a new kind of vehicle. Unlike an airplane, it didn't require wings or a propeller. It was a rocket. The result was the V-2. For the first time in history, a human-built vehicle routinely reached the edge of space. These rockets decimated Europe during the war. All the new advancements made during the Second World War meant that planes were flying faster than ever, but these high speeds meant that airplanes began to hit a wall. As aircraft approached greater speeds, traditional propeller designs became inefficient. In order to go faster, scientists found that a new approach would be needed. In both Britain and Germany, engineers developed a new type of engine. Instead of pulling an aircraft through the air with a propeller, these engines generated thrust by accelerating hot gas from the back of the plane. The concept became known as jet propulsion. Yet as pilots approached the speed of sound, something strange would happen. Shockwaves formed around the aircraft and controlling the plane became extremely difficult. and many believed that a barrier existed that could not be crossed. On October 14, 1947, test pilot Chuck Yeager climbed into an experimental aircraft called the Bell X-1. The Bell X-1 was designed so that it could push the limits of this barrier. Released high above the California desert, the X-1 took flight. And a few moments later, Yeager became the first human being to travel faster than the speed of sound. This barrier that pilots kept encountering was actually the sound barrier. A series of experimental aircraft known as the X-planes pushed the limits of speed and altitude even further. With each test flight, humanity climbed higher into the atmosphere and closer to the edge of space. Mankind was about to begin its next great step, leaving the atmosphere behind.
Attention! Tribunal!
Judges from Britain, America, Russia, and France assemble in Nuremberg's courthouse.
When World War II had ended, the United States and the Soviet Union both captured German technology as well as their people. Through Operation Paperclip, the US brought over Wernher von Braun and many other scientists. Both countries sought to improve their own rocket programs by using their enemies' research. Going back even further to the mid-1930s, there was a small group of scientists in California that had begun experiments using rocket engines. Among the group was self-taught rocket engineer Jack Parsons, who, while being a genius in the field of rocketry, also has ties to the occult. The work of Parsons and his colleagues would eventually contribute to the creation of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, better known as JPL. Both JPL and various other organizations in the US started working on the captured V-2 rockets. In 1947, fruit flies became the first living creatures carried into space aboard a modified V-2 rocket. Scientists wanted to find out what happened to living organisms who leave the atmosphere. As the 1950s progressed, both the United States and the Soviet Union invested heavily in rocket development, and both countries realized the advantages of having a developed space program.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union had launched a modified nuclear war missile carrying humanity's first satellite, Sputnik 1. The man behind this project was Sergei Korolev. Sergei was the creator of the R-7 Semyorka rocket, an ICBM that was built for delivering nuclear warheads. Standing more than 100 feet tall, the R-7 became the most powerful rocket ever built at the time. And with this new rocket, the Soviets believed they could reach orbit. Reaching orbit was way harder than just flying higher. An object must travel so fast that as it falls towards Earth, the planet curves away beneath it, so that it never truly stops falling. Instead, it just circles the Earth continuously. The rocket itself was an extraordinary achievement, and yet its payload, Sputnik 1, was tiny. Sputnik 1 measured just under 2 feet in diameter and weighed 184 pounds. It carried a few batteries and antenna that relayed a signal back to Earth.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
This news terrified the American public and its allies at the time, though the US government was not as frightened. In a memorandum sent to the White House press secretary, the U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles wrote, "The United States has not neglected this field." President Eisenhower also attempted to ease the general public's concerns by stating, "From what the Soviets say, they have put one small ball in the air, and that there is no additional threat to the United States."
Всем советским людям особенно приятно, что коллективы научно-исследовательских институтов, конструкторских бюро, заводов и исполнительных организаций, создавшие новую ракету, посвящают этот спуск 21-му съезду Коммунистической партии Советского Союза.
The Soviets just a month later launched Sputnik 2, this time carrying a heavier payload as well as room for a passenger, a stray dog named Laika. The space race had officially begun, and the Americans were falling behind.
So tonight I shall concentrate on the most immediate aspects of this question of the relationship of science to the defenses of our country.
Between JPL and the U.S. Army, the United States had many different rocket programs. The United States prepared to launch its own satellite as part of Project Vanguard. On December 6, 1957, Vanguard TV-3 sat on its launch pad. For many Americans, this failure was a humiliating setback. But behind the scenes, a separate team had already been working on their own rocket, the Jupiter C. Less than 2 months later, on January 31, 1958, the United States successfully launched Explorer 1.
The moment is at hand. The countdown reaches 0.
And America had entered the space age.
Some 3 minutes later, Explorer is in orbit.
Explorer 1 reached orbit just like Sputnik, except it also carried scientific instruments that were designed to study the environment beyond the atmosphere. And the data it returned led to the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts. The Soviets launched Sputnik 3 in May of 1958. And after a few months of creating legislation to combat the Soviets' rocket program, President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958, officially founding NASA. The first goal with NASA was announced immediately, called Project Mercury. The goal was to get a human in space. But before any astronaut could fly, the Soviet Union achieved another historic first. On April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin climbed aboard Vostok 1. And for the first time ever, a human being had entered space. Gagarin completed a single orbit of the Earth before safely returning home.
Now, sir, what do you think about this achievement of the Russians?
I think it's a remarkable thing. My only regret is that we couldn't get there first.
In the United States, some questioned whether the mission had actually occurred.
I doubt whether this was actually accomplished. The man seemed to be hidden for 2-3 days, and they could say anybody did in this situation.
On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard climbed aboard Freedom 7 and launched into the sky using a Redstone rocket. His flight lasted only 15 minutes and did not enter orbit, but it marked a turning point for NASA. Just 20 days after Shepard's flight, President John F. Kennedy stood before a joint session of Congress and proposed a new goal.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
At the time, Kennedy's challenge seemed almost impossible. The technology required to reach the moon did not exist yet, and so across the United States, hundreds of thousands of people went to work. Among the most important figures was Wernher von Braun and the team at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The team at NASA would eventually build one of the most powerful rockets of all time, the Saturn V. Standing 363 feet tall, the Saturn V remains one of the largest and most powerful machines ever built. At its base were 5 F1 engines that altogether generated 7.6 million pounds of thrust. The Saturn V was not simply larger than previous rockets, it was on a whole different scale. Project Mercury and its Redstone and Atlas rockets had proven that humans could survive in spaceflight. Project Gemini and its Titan GLV rockets taught astronauts how to live and work in space. And now the Apollo missions would lead humans to the moon. But the path to the moon would not be without tragedy. On January 27, 1967, the crew of Apollo 1 lost their lives during a launch pad test. The aftermath of Apollo 1 would influence every mission that followed. After months of redesign and testing, Apollo resumed. Apollo 7 tested the redesigned spacecraft in Earth orbit.
Flight booster. Yeah. We appear we may be slightly marginal on rocks. We'll keep it. Okay, stand by. Cut off. J2 cut off.
And finally, Apollo 8 became the first crewed mission to leave Earth orbit and travel to the moon. The purpose of the mission was to learn about space navigation and to scout potential landing sites for upcoming missions.
This is launch control coming up on 3 minutes and 30 seconds and counting.
The crew of Apollo 8 was Commander Frank Borman, Command Module Pilot James Lovell Jr., and Lunar Module Pilot William Anders. The three became the first humans in history to leave orbit. During the mission, astronaut William Anders was able to capture one of the most iconic photos in space exploration: Earthrise. Before takeoff, NASA had asked the crew to prepare a message that they could broadcast live to the world while they were in space.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise.
And on Christmas Eve 1968, the crew spoke to an estimated 1 billion people.
And for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit. Apollo 10 served as a full dress rehearsal for the moon landing. Every major step of the mission was performed except for the landing itself. The crew traveled to lunar orbit, separated the lunar module, and descended to within a few miles of the moon's surface before returning to the command module. Years after the mission, lunar module pilot Gene Cernan said, "A lot of people thought about the kind of people we were. Don't give those guys an opportunity to land, because they might." Of course, after the success of Apollo 10, came Apollo 11.
Astronaut Michael Collins would pilot the Apollo command module. astronaut Edwin Aldrin Jr. would pilot the lunar module. And astronaut Neil Armstrong would serve as mission commander.
Faraway planets and different ways of getting there. You know, the people who flew to the moon had to think about it and play about it and be curious about it long before they ever did it. It's really good to wonder about things. Some wonderful inventions have come about from people wondering about them.
Thousands of reporters and news crew covered the grounds of Kennedy Space Center.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 2 hours, 55
Launch day had become an event across the nation. The entire world was focused on this moment. NASA rolled the Saturn V to the launch pad, and the astronauts made their final preparations.
Columbus explored one new world. You're about to explore another. How do you feel about such comparisons?
Well, I'm very impressed to be compared with Columbus, and he did it without an entire nation's efforts behind him. Our voyage is the voyage of a nation and a voyage of humanity, while his was a voyage of a very limited few.
And 20 seconds. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 sat ready on Launch Complex 39A. And the countdown began.
12, 11, 10, 9, ignition sequence
For 4 days, Apollo 11 traveled nearly 250,000 miles of space. Once they had arrived at the moon, Eagle disconnected from the command module and headed towards the moon's surface. As Michael Collins continued orbiting overhead, Eagle began its descent toward the lunar surface.
Eagle, Houston, we see you on the steerable, over.
The landing did not go as planned. The designated landing area was deemed unsafe.
Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm. We're go, flight. Okay, we're go.
And so Armstrong manually guided the spacecraft towards a safer location.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
A few hours later, Neil Armstrong descended the ladder and stepped onto the lunar surface.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Okay, Buzz, we ready to...
During their time on the surface, Armstrong and Aldrin conducted scientific experiments, collected lunar samples, and they took plenty of photos. Less than 66 years after the Wright brothers left the ground at Kitty Hawk, human beings had walked on the moon.
This operation is somewhat like the periscope of a submarine. All you see is the three of us, but beneath the surface are thousands and thousands of others. And to all those, I would like to say thank you very much. Personally, and reflecting the events of the past several days, a verse from the Psalms comes to mind to me. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And to all the other people that are listening and watching tonight, God bless you. Good night from Apollo 11.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff. 11:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
In the years that followed, astronauts returned to the lunar surface again and again. Apollo 12 touched down within walking distance of the robotic Surveyor 3 spacecraft. This mission showed that astronauts could accurately navigate the lunar surface. Apollo 14 returned astronauts to the moon. Apollo 15 introduced the Lunar Roving Vehicle, allowing crews to travel farther than previous missions.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Apollo 16 expanded exploration into the lunar highlands.
Remove us at 354 and 3.4. That's about 15 meters across and about 5 meters deep, and I bet you it punched through.
Apollo 17 carried geologist Harrison Schmitt to the moon, the first and only professional scientist to walk upon its surface.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. May, when much to my surprise, a pair of bunny eyes. Oh, is this a neat way to travel? Isn't it great?
By the time Apollo concluded in 1972, 12 humans had walked on the moon, and they brought back hundreds of pounds of lunar samples that were shared with scientists around the world. Even as astronauts explored the lunar surface, NASA's ambitions stretched beyond the moon, and robotic spacecraft were beginning to venture deeper into the solar system. Because they didn't have to support human life, robotic probes can conduct work in space for as long as they continued functioning. Missions like Mariner provided humanity's first close-up views of Venus and Mars. Viking successfully landed on the surface of Mars, returning images from another planet. And of course, Voyager carried the now famous golden record deep into space.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
Voyager also captured one of the most iconic images of Earth. the pale blue dot. As the Apollo program drew to a close, the world of spaceflight was changing.
Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
What had begun as a competition between two superpowers was gradually becoming a global endeavor.
Contact. Capture. Soyuz, this is Apollo. Now hatch 4 is open. Over. Hello.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to talk to you on a subject of deep concern to all Americans and to many people in all parts of the world, the war in Vietnam. I believe that one of the reasons for the deep division about Vietnam is that many Americans have lost confidence in what their government has told them about our policy.
As governments reconsidered their priorities and budgets tightened, many wondered what the next chapter of exploration would look like. NASA's answer? The space shuttle. Previous missions had relied on disposable rockets and capsules. Once their work was complete, most of the vehicle was discarded and built again. The space shuttle would be different. It would launch like a rocket, operate like a spacecraft, and return to Earth to fly again. Engineers hoped it would make access to space more routine and open the door to a new era. The shuttle was not just one single vehicle. 3 main components worked together to reach orbit. At launch, 2 massive rocket boosters and 3 main engines lifted the vehicle towards space. Once their fuel was exhausted, the boosters separated and parachuted back to Earth for recovery.
Booster separation confirmed.
The large external tank was discarded after reaching space. The space shuttle remains one of the most recognizable vehicles ever built. For an entire generation, this is what a spaceship looked like. Unlike the capsules that came before it, the space shuttle carried no engines capable of powering its return to Earth. So once it re-entered the atmosphere, it became a glider. The vehicle descended through the atmosphere and flew to a runway, landing much like an aircraft. While the shuttle could glide to a landing, it could not take off on its own. So after landing at locations away from Florida, the orbiter had to be transported back to the Kennedy Space Center. To accomplish this, NASA modified a Boeing 747, and the orbiter was mounted on top of the plane and flown across the country. These flights were escorted by NASA-branded fighter jets. During its 30-year career, the Space Shuttle accomplished many feats. It launched and serviced the Hubble Space Telescope. It helped construct the International Space Station. It transformed spaceflight from brief visits into a permanent presence in orbit. The Space Shuttle was not without its faults. Challenger and Columbia reminded the world that even as humanity pushed farther into space, the journey was never without danger. In 2011, the Space Shuttle era came to an end. And even as the shuttle retired, a new generation of spacecraft was emerging. For decades, rockets were treated like disposable machines. Now engineers are attempting a whole new idea: reusable rockets. Today, humanity prepares once again for a journey beyond Earth orbit. The Artemis program aims to return astronauts to the moon and establish a foundation for future missions deeper into space.
Booster ignition and liftoff. The crew of Artemis 2 now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
Flight has become such a normal part of everyday life that we stop noticing just how extraordinary it is. Recently, in July of 2026, we had the busiest day ever recorded for commercial air travel. Over 150,000 commercial flights took off in one day. We live in a time where flying has become so mundane that we board a plane, sit in our seats, and put on the Devil Wears Prada without ever thinking about the fact that we are flying through the sky. That in itself is an achievement. That something once considered impossible has now become our ordinary. More than a century ago, two brothers stood on a stretch of sand in North Carolina and proved that humanity could fly. Since then, we have crossed oceans, broken the sound barrier, walked on the moon, built stations in orbit, and of course, we landed rovers on Mars. Every step began with someone trying something they had never done before. Every generation inherited the achievements of those who came before and carried them a little farther. And somewhere out there is another challenge, just waiting to be solved. But only if you choose to dare, mighty,